In this lecture, we're talking about the topic of ethical emotivism, emotivism, ethical emotivism. And this section of material we began studying, or this is part of our studying of the topic of what I have termed and what others term anti-ethics. By anti-ethics, it means, or it has reference to those individuals who reject the standard typical approaches to ethical reasoning or ethical decision making or ethical theory that we've looked at. For example, these individuals would say that the approach of Immanuel Kant, or the approach of utilitarianism, or the approach of natural law ethics or divine command ethics, or any of the other theories that we might have looked at, those theories really are insufficient for the day and time in which we live. And so we're calling this material anti-ethics because really they are they propose alternative approaches to the doing of ethics, and in some instances reject ethical reasoning and ethical conclusions. And that's really the case with emotivism, which we're looking at today. So I'm going to pull up the slide presentation for ethical emotivism, and then I will share it with you. And we will address it. Ethical emotivism. You should be able to see that on your screen. I'm going to move this to slideshow. All right, so emotivism. Once again, this is under the section of material in the course that we're addressing as anti-ethics. And ethical emotivism is a pretty radical perspective on ethics. So let's begin talking about it. Emotivism. So what are our goals and what are our objectives for this lecture on the topic of ethical emotivism? By the end of this lecture, you should be able to define what ethical emotivism actually is. Secondly, you should be able to verbalize or to express A.J. Ayer's ideas on emotivism. Next, you should be able to discuss why ethical emotivism is called the Boo-Hara theory of ethics, and you should be able to apply it to ethical statements. Next, you should also be able or be confident or competent in using terms such as non-cognitive verification, analytic thoughts, and synthetic thoughts. And you should be able to identify analytic thoughts and synthetic thoughts. So those are the goals for this particular lecture. Emotivism. Well, let's look at a definition for emotivism. Emotivism really is a theory which constitutes it as a meta-ethical approach. Meta-ethics deals with ethical theory. Emotivism is an ethical theory. Therefore, emotivism falls under the rubric or the category of meta-ethical approaches. What is emotivism? Well, I've placed on the screen in front of you a definition of what emotivism is. It's a theory that believes that the objective moral laws do not exist. Objective moral laws do not exist. That is, there are no objective moral laws out there in the cosmos or out there in the natural world or in any context for us to live by that apply. No objective moral laws that apply to all individuals of all ages, all eras, all times, etc. Ethical emotivism is a non-cognitivist theory. That means that it is a theory based upon, let me say it this way. Ethical emotivism rejects the notion of any kind of reasoned basis for ethics, thus non-cognitivism. Ethical emotivism says that ethical conclusions cannot be reason-based, and we will come to understand that more a little bit later on in the lecture. The next portion of the definition says that moral terms express personal emotional attitudes and not propositions. Now, notice that statement very closely. Moral terms and moral statements express personal emotional attitudes and not propositions, thus the name emotivism. Emotivism, when you see the word emotivism, you should automatically think of the word emotion or emotional. In the eyes of the emotivists, ethical statements are really nothing more than emotive or emotional utterances. They are simply, to clarify that in the next statement, expressions of personal approval. That's the hurrah part of the boo hurrah theory. Personal approval, I like that. I agree with that. I affirm that. Or personal disapproval. That's the boo portion of the boo hurrah theory, or the boo hurrah understanding of ethical emotivism. Um, and so, for example, as we shall see, when I say that abortion is wrong, or when someone states that abortion is wrong, that's a boo statement. I'm saying that emotionally, I do not approve of it. It's not a factual statement. It's not a moral, not based on a moral proposition. It's simply an emotional statement. I disagree with it emotionally. When I say that abortion is right, then therefore that's the hurrah part. I do agree with it. I am comfortable with it. So all that is to say that when you talk about emotivism, emotivism views any ethical statement that we might make regarding the rightness or the wrongness of a particular act or deed or condition as nothing more than emotive statements. The ethical emotivists then go on to say this explains why people disagree about morality. They would say that because ethical statements are simply nothing more than emotions, that accounts for the reasons why different people will voice different perspectives on different ethical scenarios or situations. Now, the primary advocate that we're going to look at with regard to ethical emotivism and that you need to know is A.J. Ayer. A.J. Ayer was a part of what has come to be known as the Vienna Circle. The Vienna Circle back in the day were a group of scientists who resided in Vienna, and being scientists, they were into empirical verification. Those of you who study biology or who study physics or who study some of the sciences should know what empirical verification is. Empirical verification is that which can be verified, or that which has reference to that which can be verified, or that which can be established on the basis of the sense of sensory experience. The scientific method for the scientist is based upon empirical verification. So for A.J. Ayer, ethical statements are neither verifiable nor are they analytic. Ethical statements for Ayer cannot be empirically verified. When I say that water consists of hydrogen and oxygen in certain parts, that can be verified via the scientific method by empirical data research. But when it comes to a moral statement, such as capital punishment is wrong, that cannot be verified by the scientific method. It is not empirically verifiable. So therefore, the Vienna Circle and A.J. Ayer in particular did not believe in the validity of moral statements. They understood moral statements as, once again, being nothing more than expressions of joy or pain, such as i.e. an emotion. And also they concluded that these moral statements that we make do have the objective of attempting to persuade others to join us in our feelings with regard to favor or disfavor regarding a particular moral action. Now, don't confuse emotivism with subjectivism. Emotivism is not subjectivism, as the last sentence on the slide indicates. Uh, Emotivism is not subjectivism. Emotivism is simply to say that uh, moral statements, ethical statements, are nothing more than emotional utterances. Thus, that is why it is called the Boo-Hurrah theory. So that's a definition of emotivism, and that's A.J. Ayer's conclusion regarding ethical statements as related to emotivism, and he was a primary advocate of emotivism. Now, challenges regarding the topic of emotivism. No basic moral principles can be established. Ethical debate becomes a pointless activity. There is no universal agreement that some actions are wrong. So, what does that mean? That means that number one, if moral statements are nothing more than emotional utterances, then we cannot establish any kind of moral principles that are applicable guidelines for people to live by across the board. As a result of that, if ethical statements are nothing more than emotional statements, then it is pointless for us to debate or to argue about what is right or wrong. A.J. Ayer and other members of the Vienna Circle would probably say that this class, Introduction to Ethical Thought, is completely beside the point. There's no need for this because ethical statements are simply nothing more than one's own emotional responses to a given circumstance or a given situation. And then next, if ethical statements are simply emotional statements, there's no way that we can establish any kind of universal agreement with regard to what actions are wrong. Um, in short, moral terms, moral statements, moral affirmations of what is right and what is wrong are simply expressions of our emotions. And we can think of that in terms of abortion or in terms of capital punishment or in terms of physician-assisted suicide. So those are some of the challenges that the endorsement of emotivism brings. Now, let me elaborate a little bit more based upon this slide with regard to exactly what emotivism is. It is an ethical theory that says moral statements are simply expressions of feelings, or that moral statements are simply expressions of emotions. It is a non-cognitive theory. That means that it believes that moral statements are non-cognitive statements. They are not rational statements. They are not reasonably based statements. They are non-cognitive. Cognition takes place in your head. Cognition has to do with regard to reasoning. So moral statements have nothing to do with the reasoning. Now that's Immanuel Kant, who we looked at a few lectures ago, thought that moral statements are based in human reason. Natural law argues that moral statements are based in human reason, that we can reason our way toward what is right or what is wrong. The utilitarians thought that what is moral can be reasonably arrived at, can be rationally concluded or rationally realized simply through the use of the cognitive processes of logic and reason and rationality. But the emotivists are non-cognitivists. They say that ethical statements are not rational statements, rather ethical statements are emotional statements. As a result of there being emotional statements, they conclude that ethical statements cannot be proved to be true or false. For example, if I say capital punishment is wrong, the emotivists say, well, how do you know that? Uh, I might present an argument, but they would disagree with it. They would say, no, that's simply an emotional utterance saying that you disagree with it, that it makes you uncomfortable. Uh, and you're trying to convince someone of joining you in that conclusion. But nonetheless, it is not a rational statement. Why? It is not rational because you cannot verify it. It does not pass the principle of verification that the emotivists require that any truth means. Therefore, objective moral laws do not exist. So there's no universal moral standards for us to live by, because moral statements are not rational statements, and they are not rational statements because they are not verifiable statements. The only statements that are rational, or the only conclusions that are rational, are those that are empirically verifiable via the scientific method. Remember, these guys in this camp were, generally speaking, a group of scientists. As scientists, they thought that the only way truth can be affirmed or nailed down is via the route of empirical verification, the scientific method. If you can't prove it in a lab via the scientific method, then you cannot regard it as true. For example, a scientific worldview in many circles will say that because we cannot prove via the scientific method or via empirical verification that God exists, therefore we cannot regard the statement that God exists as true. Why? Because it's simply not empirically verifiable. There's no way in a lab or in a test tube, or no way via the scientific method, that we can verify God's existence. So therefore, it's simply an emotional statement, for example, an emotional utterance. It's not scientifically verifiable. That's the way that the emotivists felt about ethical statements. You cannot verify them in the lab. You cannot verify them via the scientific method. So therefore, they are nothing more than nonsensical statements. They're nothing more than nonsensical statements. They're not truth. They are not reliable. They're not to be regarded as truth. Simply for this reason, they cannot be verified via the scientific method. We might point to a religious document. We might point to some other document that says that a certain activity or a certain event or a certain type of conduct is right or wrong, but they would say that's not a reliable means of verification. The only reliable means of verification is the scientific method. If you cannot verify something via the scientific method, then therefore it is not to be regarded as truth, and that applies to ethical statements. All right, so once again, emotivism originated in the 1920s via a group of scientists who were called the Vienna Circle. They developed a theory which was called logical positivism. So the Vienna Circle, the scientists who were part of the Vienna Circle, developed a theory called logical positivism. Logical positivism, according to the third bullet point on the screen, said this: that only what can be tested and verified via the scientific method is a meaningful thing. Only that which can be tested and verified via the scientific method is to be regarded as true and as meaningful. So once again, you take that and you apply it to ethical statements such as capital punishment is wrong. Can that be tested? No. Can it be tested empirically? No. Can it be tested via the scientific method? No. Can it be proven to be true or false via the scientific method? No. So therefore, the logical positivists, the scientists in the Vienna Circle, said you cannot regard the ethical statement that capital punishment is wrong as truth, because it is not empirically verifiable. Here's a picture of A.J. Ayer. He was a British philosopher and a very brilliant man. I've watched interviews with him. He's no longer alive, obviously. He died in 1989. But I've watched interviews with him, and he was a very brilliant man. But he was a logical positivist. And as a result of being a logical positivist, he was an emotivist. And because he was an emotivist, he concluded that ethical statements are not reliable statements. They're not to be regarded as truth. So, all right. So let's look at this task. I've put these exercises on the screen in front of you, and I would look closely at these if I were you, because you may see these again on an exam at the end of the term or the end of the semester. So let's look at these and talk about them. And I would strongly suggest that as we talk about each one of these, you write down how you should respond to each one of these. Number one, well, let's read the instructions. In pairs, read the text about emotivism and answer the following questions. All right. So since we're doing this via Zoom, we can't do it in pairs, but let's just do it individually. Number one is a statement such as euthanasia, which is mercy killing. Euthanasia, mercy killing. Euthanasia is wrong. Is that a factual statement for an emotivist? Well, how do we go about answering that? We go about answering that in this fashion. Answer it in your mind first, and then I'll elaborate on it. Is the statement euthanasia wrong? Is wrong. Is that a factual statement for an emotivist? Well, what's the question we have to ask? The question we ask is it empirically verifiable? Can we establish via the scientific method that euthanasia, mercy killing, is wrong? No, we can't. There's no way to do that. It is not empirically verifiable. So therefore, as a result of that, that is not a factual statement for an emotivist. It's an emotive statement. And as an emotive statement, it is a nonsensical statement. So we cannot absolutely say that euthanasia is wrong. Number two, what can an ethical statement arouse and stimulate? An ethical statement can arouse and can stimulate emotions in the person who postulates the ethical statement, but it can also stimulate contemplation and also possibly stimulate a following. So ethical statements generally are aimed at persuasion. So number three, what two types of statements are meaningful for A.J. Ayer and the logical positivist? Well, there are two types of statements that are meaningful. Those statements that are verified empirically via the scientific method, and those statements that are verified analytically. They're called analytic statements, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in one moment. So to answer number three, once again, what two types of statements are meaningful for A.J. Ayer and the logical positivist? There are two. Empirical statements, also known as synthetic statements. Empirical statements, also known as synthetic statements. And analytic statements, which we will study a little bit more later, and I'll give you examples of what an analytic statement is. Those are the two types of statements that can be regarded as meaningful for the logical positivist. If a statement is not a synthetically verifiable or empirically verifiable statement, it is not to be regarded as meaningful. If a statement is not an analytic statement, it is not to be regarded as meaningful. So therefore, ethical statements are not empirically verifiable. Secondly, as we shall see, ethical statements are not analytically verifiable. They are not analytic statements, so they cannot be regarded as meaningful. So generally, on the basis of those two tests, the emotivist would say that, and the logical positivist would say that ethical statements are not meaningful, that they are just nonsensical statements. The next point I want to make is number five. What is the boo-hurrah theory? The boo-hurrah theory is sometimes what is known as what emotivism is known as. Sometimes emotivism is called the boo-hurrah theory. Why is that? Because emotivism says that ethical statements are nothing more than statements of emotions. On the one hand, if we say capital punishment is right, we are saying hurrah. Emotionally, we are affirming capital punishment, and we're trying to convince others to affirm capital punishment. But if we say capital punishment is wrong, we're saying boo. It makes us feel uncomfortable. We are emotionally against capital punishment. It is not a moral statement. Capital punishment is wrong. And for the emotivist, it is an emotional statement. That's why the emotivism is also known as the boo-hurrah theory. Now, that slide once again has a photo of A.J. Ayer, and then we move to this statement. Mr. Ayer, as we said a moment ago, says that a statement is meaningful only if it can be verified. The word verified has reference to what is called the verification principle. If a statement does not pass the principle of verification, If it cannot be empirically or analytically verified, then therefore it cannot be regarded as truth. It is not a meaningful statement. Now then, on this slide, A.J. Ayer says that a meaningful statement can be verified in one of two ways. And this is where this material may get a little more dense, but this is really not that complicated. And I think the way that I approach this makes it very basic and very simple. And I've tried to just reduce it to its basic minimum. A.J. Ayer says that there are two ways that a statement can be regarded as meaningful, or two ways that a statement can be verified. It can be verified synthetically, and we need to know what that means. And it can be verified analytically. We need to know what that means. So, synthetic statements. Mr. Ayer and other logical positivists say that synthetic statements are one of the means by which something can be verified as true or as valid or as reliable. What does it mean that it's a synthetic statement? I've given you the definition there on the page. A synthetic statement can be verified by sensory experience, by seeing, tasting, touching, feeling, smelling, by one of the five senses, right? So a synthetic statement is that kind of statement that can be verified by the senses. All right. If I can verify something by my senses, by my smell, touch, taste, feel, sight, etc., then therefore I can regard it as meaningful or as valid or as true. I've given you an example here. Consider the statement, there is a squirrel in that tree. Consider the statement, there's a squirrel in that tree. Is that a synthetic statement? Well, yes, that's a synthetic statement because you can verify it via your senses. You can see the squirrel in the tree. Perhaps you can hear the squirrel in the tree. You can hear the squirrel chirping or barking, whatever you want to call what sound they make. We have them in our backyard constantly, and the dogs are after them. And the squirrels will sit up in the tree and bark at the dogs and ridicule them and make fun of them. But back to the point, is that statement a synthetic statement? Yes, it's a synthetic statement because it can be verified via the senses. What about this statement? And the type is pretty small on this slide, but you can still read it, being the young whippersnappers that you are. Consider the statement, Anna has blonde hair. Is that a synthetic statement? Absolutely, that is a synthetic statement because you can verify it via your senses. You can look at her hair there on the slide and you can see that her hair has blonde in it and that it is blonde. You can also say that some of it's kind of brownish, I guess. But anyhow, you can verify that her hair is blonde. So that's a synthetic statement. You can verify it via your senses. So all of that is to say this, that one of the ways that the logical positivist concluded that we can verify a statement as meaningful is if it is verifiable by the senses. So, all right, let's apply that to a moral issue. Capital punishment is wrong. Can I verify that by my eyes, taste, touch, feel, by any of my senses? No, there's no way to do that. I can't verify that. There's nothing regarding rightness or wrongness, morality and capital punishment that I can look at and I can observe. And so for the emotivist or for the logical positivist, that would not be a meaningful statement because it cannot be verified synthetically. All right, it cannot be verified by my senses. So analytic statements. So the other means by which something can be verified as true or false for the emotivist is an analytic statement. So you have two things. First of all, you have synthetic statements in verifying something via the senses. But then the logical positive said also that you can regard something as true if it is an analytic statement. And that means if it is true by definition. And this one is a little more thorny but it's really not difficult. It's just a little more challenging to get your mind around, but don't make it more complicated than it is. For example, look at the statement on the slide in front of you. Frozen water is ice. Is that statement true by definition? Frozen water is ice. Is frozen water ice? Yes. Is ice frozen water? Yes. So it is true by definition. By definition, frozen water is ice. Ice is frozen water. That is an example of an analytic statement, all right? Here's another analytic statement. 2 plus 2 equals 4. By definition, 2 plus 2 is 4. It cannot be anything else. Mathematical statements are analytic statements. It cannot be true in any other way other than to say 2 plus 2 is 4. You can't say 2 plus 2 is 5, 2 plus 2 is 8. 2 plus 2 is 4. That is an analytic statement. All right, it is true by definition. Here are some other analytic statements that you might see on the exam, but these are for the purposes of demonstrating to you what an analytic statement is. A bachelor is an unmarried man, all right? Is an unmarried man a bachelor? Yes. Is a bachelor an unmarried man? Yes. By definition, a bachelor is an unmarried man. Number 2, a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. The shortest distance between 2 points, a straight line, yes. A straight line, the shortest, yes. Therefore, it is true by definition. All right. So it's raining outside. It is raining outside. Is that an analytic statement? No, that is not an analytic statement. That is a synthetic statement. It has to be confirmed via the senses. You have to look out the window and see it. You have to open the window and smell it. You have to walk outside and feel it. That it is raining outside is a synthetic statement. So don't let that throw you off. Next, Danny Pearson is principal of Aquinas College. Is that a synthetic statement or an analytic statement? That is a synthetic statement. It is not true by definition. Someone else could be the principal of Aquinas College. Next statement, a triangle is a 3-sided shape. Is that true by definition? Yes. All triangles have 3 sides. 3 sides equals a triangle? Yes. A triangle equals 3 angles or 3 sides? Yes. Triangle. Triangle means 3 angles. So it is true by definition. So to summarize, the emotivist or the logical positivist said that the only way you can regard a statement as meaningful and as true is if it is a synthetic statement, which is verifiable by the senses, or an analytic statement, which is true by definition. So let's take the analytic statement and apply it to the statement about the ethical statement about capital punishment. Capital punishment is wrong. Is that an analytic statement? No. That is not an analytic statement. It is not true by definition. It does not have to be wrong. Wrong does not define capital punishment. Capital punishment does not define wrong. It's not an analytic statement. So that's why the logical positivists and the emotivists say that ethical statements cannot be regarded as meaningful. They are simply nothing more than nonsensical statements. So for our purposes, it's important that you be able to distinguish between synthetic statements and analytic statements and be able to apply those tests to ethical statements as under the theory of emotivism. All right, so let's look at these. War is wrong. That's a meaningless statement for the logical positivist or for the emotivist. Euthanasia is right. That's not reliable. It's not a synthetic statement. It's not an analytic statement. Capital punishment is right. Question: Are these ethical statements analytic or synthetic? They're neither one. What does A.J. Ayer conclude, therefore? They're meaningless. They have no meaning. They cannot be regarded as truth. They cannot be regarded as reliable, all right, or as trustworthy. So ethical statements, to say all of that, ethical statements occupy a space of their own for the emotivist. They are not verifiable. They are meaningless. They are nonsensical. They are empty, emotional kinds of statements. So A.J. Ayer argues that ethical moral statements are not analytic. They are not synthetic. Therefore, objective moral laws do not exist. So it's just a very radical theory, this thing of ethical emotivism. All right, ethical statements express feelings, ethical statements express emotions. Um, let me see. According to Ayer, to say the ouch I express when I tread on a pin is true is meaningless. The ouch that I express is meaningless. When I step onto something on the floor, if I step onto one of my son's what are those things that the people, the kids, children put together? I can't think of the word right now. Y'all can think of the word. Where you build skyscrapers and all those things. Y'all know what I'm talking about. When I step on one of those in the middle of the night, when I'm going to the kitchen to get a drink of water and I scream out, ouch, or some other expletive, A.J. Ayer says that's meaningless. That's really meaningless. It's just an expression of emotion, all right? In the same way, he says moral arguments are meaningless. They just have no significance. They're not reliable statements. All right. This is sometimes called the boo hurrah theory. So let me give you this example. All right. So on this slide we have a picture of a preacher standing behind the pulpit, a Christian preacher evidently, with the Bible open on his platform there, on his desk there, and he is issuing the utterance to say abortion is wrong. How would A.J. Ayer and the logical positivist and the emotivist regard that statement? All right, so you've answered that in your mind, and then why would they answer that way with regard to that statement? You need to answer that in your mind. So how would they respond, and why would they respond in that way? Is that statement, they would say, first of all, that statement is nonsense. It's meaningless. It is not meaningful. Why would they say that? Well, because that is not a synthetic statement. You can't confirm it by the senses. It might be repulsive to you to actually see an abortion performed, but that's not addressing the morality of it. That doesn't address the morality of it. The morality of that issue is not addressable synthetically. You can't verify whether it's right or wrong via your senses. Is it an analytic statement? Does abortion equal wrong and wrong? No. You could just as easily say, and there are those who say abortion is right. So it's not true by definition either. So it's neither synthetic nor is it analytic. Therefore, it's a meaningless statement. All right. In other words, to apply the boo hurrah theory, A.J. Ayer says when he says abortion is wrong, he's simply saying abortion, boo. It's an emotional utterance. And in the uttering of the word boo, or in the uttering of the statement, he's trying to persuade someone else to agree with him emotionally on that issue. Let's see. Let's do the boo hurrah thing with regard to these statements. First of all, capital punishment is wrong. Would that be boo? Yes, that would be boo. Assisted suicide is right. That's hurrah. Suicide is wrong. That's boo. Notice that the emotive response varies among people in the class. If we were in class today and we said that, some of you would have said capital punishment is wrong. You would have liked that statement, or others of you would have not liked the statement. So others of you would have said, hurrah, I agree with it. Others of you would have said, boo, I disagree with that. It's not wrong. Physician-assisted suicide is right. Some of you might have said it is a hurrah. I like that statement. Others of you might have said, boo, I don't like that statement. Suicide is wrong. Some of you would have said, I'm not sure that it's always wrong. So maybe there's a hurrah there. Others of you would have said, uh, uh, to the contrary. So you kind of see how this boo hurrah thing plays itself out. You make an ethical statement, and some people respond with boo, some people respond with hurrah. How do we account for that? We account for that according to the logical positivist by simply saying that those are nothing more than emotional utterances, and people have different emotions that they respond out of whenever they hear those statements. How do we know who is right? AJ Ayer says we don't know who's right. We can never know who's right. There's no way to know who is right. That's why moral statements, ethical statements, are meaningless statements. I'll let you read that quote on your own. And let me see. I think we're going to stop right there. Now, you'll be responsible for the rest of the material on the slides. You can read through those and make notes on those. They should be pretty basic based upon what we've already gone over, but make sure that you go over those. That's enough regarding emotivism. You should understand the concept and how it applies to ethical statements, but look at the rest of those statements and notice the work of David Hume, and just understand that he is a factor. His work is a factor in the position of the logical positivist. All right, so that's enough with regard to emotivism, and I hope you're having a good day, and I will see you in the next lecture.